your holy rule was confined him, who is beyond all limitation. Because of you, the Holy Trinity is glorified and adored.
Do you want a 1 minute warning like Father James?
I think I'll be able to finish within 10 minutes, so I don't think a 1 minute is necessary.
Oh, good.
Okay, are you ready?
All right. Time starts when you start talking.
Okay. This debate was originally meant to be on whether Protestantism was a new religion presenting new innovations, but Father James was right in suggesting that we only limit our discussion to confessional Anglicanism. But as we will see later, all the so-called great reformers have influenced the Anglican formularies. Now, to start, let me just say that my opponent, Father James Gad, who goes by the name Barely Protestant on social media, should think about changing his name to Barely Anglican. It claimed to be a traditional Anglican priest, but isn't even in the Anglican communion, as the Episcopal Missionary Church isn't even in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is a historical requirement to being an Anglican, and an essential part of the Anglican identity. So-called Anglican traditionalists, or confessional Anglicans, have been establishing parallel churches and crossing into Anglican jurisdictions, which are in fact in the Anglican communion, and in doing so have leached members from those churches, basically sucking the lifeblood out of them. My point here is simply that we can see the redefining of terms and historical meaning, which is used to deny communion with Canterbury as a requirement to being Anglican, applied throughout English church history, especially in the history with the Holy Catholic Church and separation from that mother church. Anglicans, or rather Protestants in general, would seek to ignore the motivation behind the development of the doctrines and confessional standards, but we cannot remove motivation and intent from its outcome. While I do acknowledge that the English Church, under the supreme authority of Henry VIII, had valid apostolic succession, it did start a departure from the established Catholic and Apostolic faith, with many errors arising in protest of the Catholic Church due to political motivation, which is present in confessional Anglicanism through the formularies. Examples of this can be seen with Protestant innovations in the 39 Articles and the Black Rubric in the Book of Common Prayer. In the 39 Articles, we see a rejection of the consecration and veneration of images. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and his associates like Edward Seymour even went on a politically motivated quest to rid Catholic churches of what they claimed to be idolatrous and superstitious practices, ignoring the Seventh Ecumenical Council's decrees and affirmations on the veneration of religious images and relics. In the Book of Common Prayer, we see a historical flip-flopping on Anglican Eucharist theology. Catholics were even persecuted for not affirming a symbolic understanding of Christ's presence in the Eucharist, and for rejecting the English King's supreme head as supreme head of the Church, as seen with Blessed Margaret Clitheroe, who was arrested and brutally tortured for this, while holding steadfast to her faith, unlike Cranmer when he thought he could escape execution. Blessed Margaret Clitheroe's martyrdom demonstrates how Catholics who refused to renounce their faith or compromise on their beliefs during the English Reformation were persecuted. While her rejection of the symbolic presence in the Eucharist was not the sole reason for persecution, it was an integral part of a steadfast belief in the apostolic faith and its practices which led to it. Many people today may not know that Catholic Mass itself, which is centered on the celebration of the Eucharist and the doctrine of transubstantiation that affirms the corporeal presence held in the First Millennial Church, was even outlawed under the Act of Uniformity, and priests who celebrated Mass or administrated the sacraments suffered greatly for it, and did the brave Catholic laity that protected them. From Luther to Calvin and Zwingli, it seems that all the so-called great Protestant reformers had their fingers in the Anglican theological cookie jar at some point, which was often used as a tool for political persecution of Catholics. To be fair, many Anglicans also suffered greatly, but the persecution of Catholics for rejecting the symbolic presence, which is probably a timely Zwingli adaptation that is still held by some Anglicans today, likely through his student Peter Martyr, demonstrates a rejection of the apostolic faith. Peter Martyr Vermigli, who was invited by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer to teach at the University of Oxford, had a major influence on the development of Anglican theology. The years he spent teaching at Oxford were significant in shaping the theological landscape of the English Reformation, and he played a key role in influencing Protestant theology in England during that time. While the ascension of Queen Mary to the throne of England, with the ascension of Queen Mary to the throne of England, the Zwinglian influence diminished and a more Calvinist understanding of the Eucharist was formally held by the English Church. Note that although the 1662 Book of Common Prayer does clearly acknowledge Christ's presence in the Eucharist, at least in a spiritual sense, with greater clarity than the 1552 edition, it still basically insinuates that Catholics and Orthodox are idolaters for adoring Christ and affirming his corporeal presence in the Eucharist, which is still found in the Book of Common Prayer, 1928 edition, which states, "It is hereby declared that thereby no adoration is intended or ought to be done, either unto the sacramental bread or wine, there bodily received, or unto the corporeal presence of Christ's natural flesh and blood, for the sacramental bread and wine remain still in their very natural substances, and therefore may not be adored. For that were idolatry, to be abhorred of all faithful Christians." That is within brackets, "and the natural body and blood of our Saviour Christ are in heaven, and not here, it being against the truth of Christ's natural body to be at one time in more places than one." The Anglican understanding, of course, contradicts the early church understanding of the Eucharist as seen in the early Eucharistic prayers. Does the 1928 edition, which you hold to, does that completely reject the ordination of females?
Yes.
In where does it reject it?
In, again, the three liturgies for ordination, and consecration.
Like the liturgy of St. Basil and the divine liturgy of St. James, with adoration of the consecrated host also being present in the first millennia. I could also reference the Bible with John 6:53-56, among other verses of the Bible, but the liturgy demonstrates clearly how the early church affirmed the corporeal presence of Christ. Understand that even if the Anglican Church had valid apostolic succession, it would still not be a continuation of the apostolic faith, just like Arianism wasn't a continuation of the apostolic faith. I will add that some Anglican priests were ordained by Old Catholics and even Orthodox, but overall the ordination is questionable, with the Anglican Church not viewing holy orders, holy sacraments in the same way as Catholics or Orthodox do, as seen from the 1970s onwards with the ordination of women and later openly gay LGBTQI individuals to the priesthood and the overall view regarding the nature of the holy sacraments. I understand how confessional and continuing Anglicans in the ACNA and the Episcopal Missionary Church, which seek to distance themselves from this and the Anglican Communion, but as I stated earlier, to be Anglican historically means one is in the Anglican Communion and in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Some so-called traditional Anglicans, like the ACNA, have female ordination, as they are also in full communion with GAFCON. GAFCON doesn't prohibit the ordination of women. Many Anglicans today would also seek to distance themselves from King Henry VIII, but he, like Archbishop Cranmer, played a central role in the establishment of the Church of England as a separate entity from the Catholic Church. Henry's actions initiated a process which led to the English Reformation and establishment of the Church of England as a distinct entity with its own ecclesiastical structure and theology, a theology which is not a continuation of the Catholic and Apostolic faith. I thank you all for your time and hope this was useful to all of you watching it. This is my first official debate and it was really fun. I enjoyed learning about Anglicanism and this was a pretty good motivation to do that. Now, I didn't really touch on the Edward VI ordinal controversy, which led to Anglicanism itself no longer having valid holy orders, because even confessional Anglicans would agree that some Anglican priests aren't validly ordained, and historically the Pope does intervene to standardize or clarify certain aspects of the ordination ritual in response to doctrinal controversies or liturgical abuses, as with Pope Gregory the Great. In conclusion, I would just like to clarify that the Catholic Church does believe God's mercy and grace, like the Holy Sacraments, can be found outside of the boundaries of the Church. So again, even if the Anglican Church did in fact have valid sacraments, it would not be a continuation of the Apostolic faith, just like any other heretical group which separated from the Holy Catholic Church. The Lord does tie who he wills to his Church. All validly baptized Christians are considered to be in an imperfect communion with the Catholic Church by virtue of the baptismal membership, but there is only one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and there is no salvation outside of the Holy Catholic Church. To be in a continuation of the Apostolic Church and faith, they must be in full communion with the one true Church and not opposed to it. They must let go of holding on to heretical beliefs promulgated in bad faith due to political motivation and modern innovations, which led to female priests in the or being ordained in Protestantism. Revisionists may claim to be a continuation of what was before them, but we know what existed before them and have the rulings on matters pertaining to the apostolic faith. We can see the new innovations which developed outside of the Holy Catholic Church and in opposition to it, like the rejection of the literal presence of Christ in the Eucharist and the rejection of papal authority, replacing the Pope as the head of the Church in favor of the king and state, which has led to the downfall of many of the early Protestant churches, as seen with the Anglicans and Lutherans during the 20th and 21st century. So I say to anyone listening, seek communion with Rome. Where Peter is, there the church is.